But speaking of things that have been controversial and polarizing, this past week on NXT television, Becky Lynch came and became the NXT Women's Championship. She defeated Women's Championship. She became the NXT Women's Champion by defeating Tiffany Stratton. This was something that was very polarizing, especially amongst Mo and I. I wanted Mo to kind of to say her piece, and I'm gonna say mine. But I want Mo's reaction to Becky Lynch going to to NXT to win the women's championship and beating Tiffany Stratton. So go ahead.
First off, I feel like Jordan's about to piss me off after anything I say. And like now I'm pretty pissed off. That's number one. Number two. All right. Let me start with this. Let me start with this. Rebecca, Miss Becky Flair, whatever you want to call yourself, the fraud. I dislike this decision very much. I dislike this decision very much because I feel like we have such a talented. I would drop my headphone. My headphone don't want to hear me talk shit about Miss Rebecca. Are you a Becky Lynch fan too? Give me a moment. My headphone is a Becky Lynch fan because that bitch escaped my fucking ears as soon as I started mentioning Miss Rebecca. All right. So here's my issue with all this. We have such a talented roster. A bunch of women who are fighting for this screen time. And I honestly feel like they've been doing a very good job over there in NXT. I feel like if I was an employee at WWE and I was in NXT and I've been busting my ass off for just to get at least 5 minutes of 2-hour TV shows, I would be pissed to see that some person who's already spammed on Monday nights coming down and then taking my opportunity and the title ball I've been working my ass for. Okay, I understand that Tiffany probably wasn't as good of a champion as we wanted her to be, but you still could have gave it to somebody else, anybody else that's been trying. And they tried this shit with Charlotte. And we all hated it. And it didn't move the needle at all. The bitch sat there and ran through the whole entire division, and she did it selfishly. And it was all just because WWE just wanted to solidify Charlotte as a Grand Slam champion. And I feel like they're just doing that with Becky. I feel like they're giving Becky the Charlotte 2.0 treatment, to where I'm just like, girl, didn't you come in with the man persona and you was chewing out Charlotte in front of us, exposing her for getting anything she wants because of her privilege, and how you're not going to be that. You're going to be the champion that the fans want. I feel like she's a hypocrite. Because you could just continue doing what the fuck you was doing over there on Monday Night Raw and not bothering her soul. I don't think she's going to come in there and move the needle or the ratings over there. Because not for nothing, I like Becky Lynch as a person. I do. But she's not that interesting to watch wrestle at all times. There's only so many people I like to watch her mix it up with. I don't see her going down there and putting on 5-star classics to where I'm going to be like, damn, I got to watch Tuesday night to go see that Becky Lynch match. No one has ever done that. I'm sorry. And I think the last time we done that was, maybe if you're a Trish fan, you wanted to see this shit or whatnot. But Becky she's not the needle mover that she once was. I feel like she peaked. I'm not saying that she's fallen down completely, but she peaked. And I feel like if there's any other time you probably want to pull this shit off, this probably around the man era. But right now, she's just kind of coasting. You're not doing NXT any more favors by bringing her there beyond taking away opportunities from other deserving women. So I'm pissed off just because I'm just like, girl, you're no better than Charlotte doing this. If she gets the belt, she needs to lose the bitch next week in order to not piss me off. All right, you're a Grand Slam. Scoot, skirt, get out the way now. But you're not doing shit for this company. You're not. I'm sorry, not this for this company, for this third party brand. Go play over there on Monday night. All right. No, I wasn't watching your segments anyways on Monday night, but go back to Monday night to go find someone else to play with. Leave the NXT girlies alone. and stop being a hypocrite. That's all I have to say on Miss Fraud, Miss Lynch, Rebecca. Okay, that's all I have to say for now. I'm gonna let Jordan speak because I feel myself already being pre-pissed off. And I'm going to prepare myself to curse him out. So go on, Jordan. What rebuttal do you have to say for me?
I have never been so excited to cook in my life. So let me start off by saying this. I like Becky.
Mm-hmm.
Mercedes is still my favorite of the four horsewomen. Um, but I wanted to address the points you made on Twitter because I have notes, girl. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel like you have to make it we have to make a very, very clear distinction of certain things. I feel like there is a difference between a fact and there's a difference between a feeling, right? Or a
Okay.
difference between a fact and a difference between an opinion. So one of
Okay.
the things, so I'm going to start with the opinion, right? Because that's subjective, right? I remember one of the first things you said was, Becky Lynch peaked and she's now spiraling, and it's very, very similar to an Alexa Bliss situation, right?
Oh,
Where
yeah, I
she
still
had
believe
her
that.
moment, huh?
I still believe that, actually.
And she had her moment in 2019 at WrestleMania 35, and now she's kind of in the midst of her decline, right? So I think there's a couple things that are at play here. Number one, I feel like this is not a matter of Becky declining as much as it is the novelty of the newness of the man wearing off. I feel like there was a point in time where, because the man was such a fresh perspective in the women's division, that people were so excited about it, because now here was a woman who had a very Stone Cold esque cadence to her, in the sense of, I'm gonna talk I'm gonna talk my talk, I'm gonna stand on business, and I'm gonna go through all of y'all. I feel like that was fresh. Here's what I will say though, when it comes to the whole like, Becky is Alexa, I disagree. And the reason why I disagree is for a very simple reason. Becky's peak and Alexa's peak are night and day, right? Becky's peak was being a top 3 merch seller. Becky's peak was being the face of a company in the midst of media rights negotiations when SmackDown was in the process of being sold to Fox. Becky's peak was being a WrestleMania main eventer, which means that because her peak is different from Alexa's peak, her spiraling down is different from Alexa spiraling down. Becky still has the credibility because she was the undisputed face of the company in a way that wasn't forced down our throats. The man was not supposed to happen. Originally, it was not supposed to happen. They wanted Charlotte and Ronda to be our WrestleMania main event, and Becky forced her way in because she was that over and she was that popular. So I feel like we
But
can't
why was she
sit up here and say,
popular? But why was she
huh?
popular? But why was she popular?
She was popular because of the main character, and she was popular because of her ascent into that main event
But what did the
spot.
man
And and
character mean to
and
us?
hold on. Her character was anti-Charlotte. Her character was the anti-Charlotte. And I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that was the next thing that I was going to address. So, part of the reason why we say that Charlotte is Charlotte isn't necessarily just because of Charlotte the person or Charlotte the character. It's Charlotte the privilege. It's the fact that Charlotte has been able to be integrated into everything that she's wanted to be integrated into. But what was your main critique of Charlotte? Charlotte can't be around unless she's in a championship match.
Yeah. But
Right.
I also think she's in my
So,
face in
going off of,
general.
huh?
And she has,
She can't,
and
she,
I have a lot of reasons why I hate Charlotte. But yes, my biggest complaint is yes, the fact she can't exist without a title role. But I also felt like she was on my screen at all times, and that she wasn't creating actual storylines. That was another thing that was pissing me off. Go ahead.
So and if I'm not mistaken, you also complained about Charlotte not putting people over, correct?
Yeah, I did.
All right.
I most
So
definitely
let's
did.
let's tackle those 2 points, right?
Okay.
Becky's last championship opportunity prior to her NXT championship match was the tag team championship situation that she got out of after WrestleMania when it was her and Trish, or her and Lita, or whatever the case may be, right? She ended up dropping the titles to Liv and Raquel. Liv went on to be one of the only people to pin Ronda multiple times. Raquel is in a main event program with Rhea, right? On top of that, she got into the story with Trish and Zoe Stark. She lost to Trish, she lost to Zoe, and she lost to Zoe on an episode of Raw. She didn't lose on like a pay-per-view. So she lost to both of them. And then in the process of that story, in the Money in the Bank ladder match, she involved herself in a spot with Bayley to put over Io Sky. So now, from Mania alone, that's Liv, who pinned Raquel multiple times and would have been in a higher position had she not gotten injured. She put over Raquel because she's currently in a world title program. Technically, put over Trish because she lost to Trish in Saudi Arabia. Put over Zoe on an episode of Raw, who is now with Shayna Baszler and is about to get into a program for the tag team titles. And then on top of that, put over Io, who is now the WWE Women's Champion on SmackDown. So now that's technically 5 people that she put over. What they were able to do with their momentum is different, because we can argue about how the momentum is different, but it really all depends on the individual and the circumstances that they've surrounded themselves with,
But I
right?
never said she
So then
wasn't pulling people over. Like, that was never my complaint about Miss Becky. I said she's taking away screen time because she wants to be a Grand Slam.
But here's the thing. I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that. I'm so glad you're bringing all this up. But that was the whole argument about Charlotte, right? Was Charlotte doesn't put people over, right? Charlotte doesn't put people over. And the only time that Charlotte is around is Charlotte's opportunities as far as championship matches. So here we have a girl in Becky who is she my favorite? No. But this is someone who over the past 5 months, outside of this NXT championship match, has put herself in places where she's putting people over and there is no championship involved. So then there's that. Then prior to the NXT championship match, all of these things weren't for a title. So now, how can Becky be Charlotte if the idea is, well, how can Becky be Charlotte if the idea is that Charlotte always needs a championship run in order to be in front of our screen and Charlotte doesn't put people over? And then on top of that, how can we say that Charlotte or Becky is becoming Charlotte when there have been literal times where Becky and Charlotte have had the same exact predicament and Charlotte had a much different outcome than Becky? Perfect example. Charlotte faced Trish Stratus SummerSlam, right? Becky had to face Trish at a premium live event, but it wasn't on the show. It got taken off the show. So literally in this particular case, here we have Charlotte and Becky literally in a very, very similar predicament. And the privilege that comes with Charlotte came up with Charlotte, but it didn't come up with Becky. And while I think that Becky and Trish was a better story than Charlotte and Trish, it's like Charlotte and Trish were still on the show, whereas Becky and Trish were not, and they had to main event a random Raw, which a lot of people are saying is a potential match of the year candidate. But I'm not going to get into that because that's subjective. So here we have a clear instance in which Becky's putting people over in a case that Charlotte wouldn't have, where Becky was literally in a similar predicament as Charlotte as far as feuding with the same person, but Becky's match being kicked off of a premium live event, whereas Charlotte's stayed on the premium live event, and Becky being in a situation over the past 5 months that had nothing to do with a championship whatsoever. So we can't call Becky Charlotte if Becky is doing things that Charlotte isn't doing or wouldn't want to do. So there's that aspect, right? But then what was the other thing that you said about about the NXT women, right? You have so much talent on the roster, but you're taking screen time away from somebody else, right? So let's go down the roster. We have Amari Miller, Ariana Grace, Blair Davenport, Cora Jade, Elektra Lopez, Fallon Henley, Gigi Dolan, JC Jane, Jakara Jackson, Kelani Jordan, Kiana James, Lash Legend, Lola Vice, Lyra Valkyrie, I'm going to pronounce that name, Miko Satomura, Nikita Lyons, Roxanne Perez, Sol Ruka, Tatum Paxley, Tiffany Stratton, Valentina Feroz, Wendy Chu, and Yulissa Leon. Out of all the names that I have just mentioned, who out of that batch could have believably been the next NXT Women's Champion? I see a couple. I see Sol Ruka, who is now injured. I see Nikita Lyons, who is injured. We see Miko Satomura. We don't know what her status is. We see Lyra, who's still in the feud to kind of build herself up. We see Gigi, Cora, maybe Blair, right? But what has been the problem since Mandy has left NXT? Credibility. The problem isn't the fact that NXT doesn't have the talent. The problem is the fact that they don't have the credibility, right? You can sit up here and we can say talent wise, oh, they have this person, this person, this person. But if you're looking at the face of the division and you're still saying, something's missing, and that has nothing to do with talent or athleticism or ability, it's because there needs to be some form of credibility that's attached to the division. And they tried it in multiple ways. We've seen Rhea down there with Dominic. Rhea gets in the ring with Lyra, right? And even though that was a good match, it's not ascribing credibility in the way that they predicted to ascribe or to, I should say, attach credibility onto the roster or onto the superstars, right? Anytime, at least in the past couple of years, that a main roster person has gone down to NXT, it's always been, with the exception of Mandy Rose, it's always been to eventually put over somebody else. The New Day won the NXT tag team titles. They ended up dropping them to Gallus. That ended up going to Tony D'Angelo and Stax. Braun Breaker had a feud with Dolph Ziggler. And right when after, as soon as they had that match, right? As soon as they had that story, right? Dolph won at TakeOver. What ended up happening? Braun Breaker went on Raw and got the NXT title the night after WrestleMania, which is arguably the biggest platform that he's ever been on. By the fact that Becky Lynch is down here in NXT, one way or another, because she has a program with Tiffany Stratton, not only is it going to give Tiffany the exposure, it's also going to give her main roster experience, and it's also going to attach credibility to the championship that wasn't there before, because it went when Mandy got fired. And it's like, okay, well, what's next? What's going to happen with Becky? Why is Becky the champion? Easy. No Mercy is on September 30th. That's in 2 weeks. It's in 2 weeks' time. And so in 2 weeks' time, there is a very big likelihood that Becky Lynch and Tiffany Stratton are going to go for the NXT championship, the NXT Women's Championship, arguably going to be a higher rated, higher drawing pay-per-view than normal because Becky is there, which is the reason why you would want to put a 4 horsewoman on any developmental product, is to expand the exposure. But in turn, guess where Becky's going to be on Monday? Raw, which means that Tiffany Stratton is going to be on Raw, which means that she's going to continue to get her reps in on a main roster show. So then there's that. Yes, I think that Becky wanted to be a Grand Slam champion, and I think that that's a big part of the reason why she won. But I also feel like this is going to give the credibility that it's needed. Give the championship the credibility that is needed, and I feel like it's also going to give Tiffany Stratton the credibility that she's needed as a champion, because when all is said and done, Tiffany Stratton is going to be the only person on that NXT women's roster that has a victory over a former 4 horsewoman. The only one. And so then going from that, right? You said that Mandy Rose, you said Mandy Rose is the biggest main roster draw on NXT.
As far as the woman goes that went down there, I feel like she's the only one that like people actually cared when she went down there. Like that it actually kind of adjusted.
So you said she said she was the only one that people cared about when she actually adjusted, right?
Yeah, because like things actually changed. Things actually shifted over there for a bit, and I feel like they're scrambling. And all I'm hearing, I mean, I'm not saying like you're completely wrong with what your points are, but I just feel like, oh, we're gonna bring Becky to help out NXT. Like, why? It's kind of implying that the roster in itself isn't enough right now, and I feel like they were doing just fine. Like, I don't think you need Becky to accomplish all this stuff.
But here's the thing, though: when you put the current World Women's Champion on NXT temporarily, having matches, having segments with current superstars, and people still aren't paying attention, where else are you going to go to? But That's a rhetorical question. But we're gonna go into this idea that Mandy Rose was the biggest main roster draw in NXT as it pertains to the women.
Yeah,
Because
she was.
I feel like Mandy Rose had a more intriguing story, but I don't think that she was a bigger draw. And we can
And
point
also
at
Sasha and Bailey, that one time they showed up. I gotta give them credit too.
yes, I feel like Sasha and Bailey were probably bigger draws. But let's look at the stats. On September 14th, 2021 is when Mandy Rose debuted on NXT. That show pulled in 770,000 viewers. On October 26th, 2021 was when Mandy Rose won the NXT Women's Championship against Raquel Rodriguez. This was at Halloween Havoc. That show drew 746,000 viewers. This past week, when Becky won the NXT Women's Championship, the show drew at the beginning of the match 961,000 viewers at the start of the match. By the end of the match, it accumulated over 1 million viewers. Now, for context, Mandy Rose was competing against Monday Night Football, or like football, during her September debut, as well as Halloween Havoc, where she won the NXT Championship, the NXT Women's Championship. When Becky was on NXT, she was competing against football and she was competing against the VMAs. She was competing against more than Mandy and was able to draw a bigger result than Mandy.
Was
But
Mandy on
I
Tuesday nights in the beginning? Like I can't remember what year they started shifting NXT from
Tuesday.
Wednesday to Tuesday. It was still a Tuesday.
It was
That
still
was a
Tuesday,
Tuesday?
I believe, if
Okay.
I'm not mistaken. But I feel like, but here's the thing though, and this is the reason why I have a strong objection to the whole like, oh, well, Mandy is this and Becky is that. Because the story of Mandy Rose and Becky Lynch are completely different, right? The reason why we look at Mandy Rose the way that we look at Mandy Rose is because Mandy Rose went to NXT, reinvented herself, led a faction, and then became better week by week by week by week by week, right? She had a more compelling story because she had a more compelling development and she flipped a switch. She went to NXT to build herself into the main eventer that we believe that she still think that, that we think that she still is. I still think that she's a main eventer. I still think that she can go on Raw and go on SmackDown. Hell, she could do a WrestleMania. I think that she has it now. But the reality is that she had to build herself into that. But with Becky Lynch showed up as the draw. Becky Lynch showed up as the draw. She showed up as the WrestleMania main eventer. She showed up as the woman who's held pretty much every belt in WWE, has done everything in WWE. And there's a difference between you going down somewhere and building yourself into the main event versus showing up as the main event. Understand? Now, I think that more people started to care about Mandy Rose because when she went down before NXT, let's look at what she was up against. She was attached to Otis at one point. Otis got the Money in the Bank briefcase taken off of her, taken off of him. So then that storyline got scrapped. Then we saw this whole Mandy, Jimmy Uso, Naomi love triangle situation. That didn't fare out well. Then we saw Mandy and Sonya as a tag team. And while they were a good tag team, they were still positioned to be number two behind Sasha and Bailey. The reality is that before Mandy went down to NXT, she was talented and she had a little bit of what we saw in NXT, but whatever she was involved in didn't work. And so she had to go to NXT to rebuild herself in order to become the superstar that we know her to be, whereas Becky Lynch showed up as the superstar. And that's the reason why I said that, like, Becky is obviously a bigger draw than Mandy Rose, but it's not Mandy Rose's fault. Becky has been like a face of the division for the better part of 5 years at this point. And obviously it's going to be a little bit different of her going down to NXT to do all of this than if a Mandy Rose was, still in NXT doing what she was doing. But
I feel like you can
that
still
was just
it's a little bit incomparable only because like NXT had some really shitty points. Like this new version of NXT was so shitty that it took time for it to actually pick up. And Becky's entering in while this new NXT product is in a better position. Just
I agree.
overall, like they found their own stride. So I wouldn't even bother comparing those ratings. I still think that what she got with the 700s is very much impressive. Because that was around a time where no one believed in this shit, and we said NXT was dead. So the fact that she pulled that amount of ratings and then she kept it up consistently, along with people believing in her, I just think that's just is different. And I'm not, and when I say that Becky Lynch is acting like Charlotte or whatnot, it's not really in a position of putting people over. That was never my critique about Becky. My critique about Becky is just the common, it still stands on the idea that I don't think it's necessary to put her down there because they're doing fine. Like, I feel like they're doing fine over there. Is it in the long run helping to put someone over? But maybe, I guess, but I also don't think it's needed. I feel like it almost pisses me off as much as when they had Becky come back and take the belt off of Bianca just so we could tell this long term story to put Bianca over more. When it's just like, well, you could have just also left the belt on Bianca because really no one was complaining about what we were looking at. I feel like they're kind of semi doing it now with Tiffany to put Tiffany over, but I feel like people are already believing in Tiffany. I think she still needs like some work with her ring work and stuff like that. Maybe she could get a little bit better with like the mic work, but like people are already believing in her. Otherwise, they wouldn't have given her the belt.
But
Um,
maybe, my bad, I didn't mean to interrupt. But
no, go
maybe
ahead.
that's why. Maybe that's the reason why she's in a feud with Becky. Like, I don't think that you're gonna get put in a storyline with the face of the women's division over the past 5 years if someone already didn't believe in you. And maybe this isn't a matter of people not believing in Tiffany. Maybe this is a matter of people believing in Tiffany and are trying to find a way to gradually introduce her to a wider audience. And by you being in a story involved with Becky Lynch, that means you're going to be seen, as stated earlier, you're going to be seen on a main roster show. You're going to have packages that weren't previously aired for Raw and SmackDown, now aired on your behalf on these shows because you're in a storyline with Becky, and now that exposure is going to put you at a different level because of who you're feuding with. So I
I have
think
to
that,
genuinely ask: do you like these Becky Lynch feuds and these matches?
do I like them?
Like all
They're
the ones
cool.
that like this between her whole program of putting all these people over, do you really feel like it's stuff that people look back on for any of these people that she's
So
been putting over? That like my
I
point is Becky Lynch even effective?
I do. I do think that she's effective, but I think that there's a difference between effective and what's my preference, right?
Okay.
Once again, I said Mercedes is my favorite horsewoman, right? And I think that Becky, but just because Becky isn't my favorite horsewoman doesn't mean that I don't see the value in what she's doing. And so I look at her story with Bianca. In hindsight, that was probably Bianca's second best story. Her first being with Sasha. Yeah.
I like the
Yeah.
Sasha one, the
And
Becky one. I didn't hate it, but I just want to see Bianca win because I was pissed off.